Nigeria, Jamaica, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Panama, South Africa, Spain, Uganda, Vietnam, and South Korea, and the country of Georgia. So thank you so much for being with us. So if you haven't already done so, please share in the chat where you're actually visiting us from, and hopefully we could stay connected throughout the remainder of the opportunity that we have together. And like I said, we've created all of this presentation with your pre-submitted questions. So use the chat feature if at any juncture there's additional thoughts or questions that come from some of the things that we may be sharing. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we're going to be discussing today. First and foremost, financial aid, as you can imagine, is a topic that is so broad and and has so much variety on so many areas that you can explore. And that's what we're really going to talk about today, is kind of defining all of these keywords and definitions so that you understand a little bit more of what things mean and how they apply to you specifically. And from this conversation, obviously there are students that are U.S. residents, permanent residents. We also have international students that do not hold a U.S. visa. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the nuances of those things too, and how merit aid, financial aid come into question. So we'll address all of those pieces. We'll explain documents like the FAFSA, the CSS profile, IDoc, all those pieces. So hang tight and we'll get to it. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, John. And John, if you could actually walk us through how to actually engage in this presentation and the different sources that we'll be talking about.
Sure. Thank you, Giselle. Thank you all for having me on. You think about financial aid, we really look at funding a college education, kind of like filling a bucket. Down there at the bottom of the screen is our bucket, and all these other pieces are the kind of financial aid, kind of other parts of monies that are going to go into the bucket to help fund your education. Money coming from your family, your money coming from the university, you're in as gift financial aid. Grants could be loans either from federal sources or from private sources, certainly any kind of scholarships that come from the university or from other foundations, other clubs or organizations you're a part of, foundations that offer you scholarships. Really, when you put all those together, you fill the bucket of what it's going to cost to come to Emory. And so there's not one faucet that fills the bucket completely, but a combination of all these sources that really make your funding up to 100% and up to that total cost. So everybody's going to have a different combination. So what's working for you may not work for somebody else. And where your funding comes from may be different from a classmate or somebody else that's applying to Emory. So nobody's right and nobody's wrong. Everybody's going to be a little bit different.
And that is such an important thing to note, is that this is actually, we're going to talk about a lot of general things and items, just like John said, but your individual specific piece is what matters to you. And that's why we have a wonderful Office of Financial Aid Advisors that you can connect with and reach out to as you're going through the process so that you can get your questions addressed. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the big philosophical pieces too. When I think about the numbers, if you will, for both Emory College and Oxford College, you know, the average financial aid award is roughly about $45,000 US dollars a year. And last year we awarded over $209 million in award. And that takes into account that roughly about 20% of our students are actually Pell eligible. So let's talk a little bit about what that means and quite frankly, philosophy. We talked about a little bit of where we are, but let's talk about where we are philosophically as an institution. So how many of you have heard of the concept of Needblind versus NeedAware? Okay, a couple have. All right, so philosophically, let's start with some frameworks, right? Before we even get into what the two terms are, first let me share that, you know, Emory is committed to meeting 100% of demonstrated need. And that is something that we'll talk a little bit more about. So let's talk about these two terms. NeedAware is essentially the meaning of a student's ability to pay. It's factored into whether or not they will be accepted at the institution. Needblind is basically schools make admissions decisions independent of a student's ability to pay, all right? So NeedAware, Needblind, those are the two differentiating factors. But this is where you have to really do your research, because some colleges, for example, and universities, of course, are able to commit to meeting a student's full needs. So acceptance students may or may not be able to attend, even if they are admitted, right? So taking those things into account, let's talk about Emory University overall. So while Emory is need-blind, right, which means we do not take into consideration your ability to pay for the institution, for domestic students, so U.S. Citizens, permanent residents, undocumented students, we are NeedAware for students that are international or that do not hold a U.S. passport, right? And so that's a piece that you want to definitely be taking into consideration when you are looking at, you know, what the ability of your family is, and what the options are available to you in regards to need-based financial aid and merit-based, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the differentiating factor between those two. But for now, let's talk about some of the tools that could be really, really helpful as you start doing this search, right? So John, I'm going to actually turn it over to you in regards to share a little bit more insight about the net price calculator and the My Intuition and some of those tools that could really help families out.
Sure. On both our admissions web pages as well as the financial aid office web pages, we've got links to two ways to estimate what kind of financial aid you might be able to receive after having included a little bit of kind of basic financial information about your family. What you're seeing right now is really kind of one of the pages of one called My Intuition. This is an online calculator where you answer, I think it's like 6 to 8 questions. What's the size of your family? What kind of income is coming into your family? Are there any other kind of assets that exist? Once you do that, My Intuition will take historical information. The guy that created this thing actually looked at thousands upon thousands of financial aid awards in the background from them. And he's basically looking at your situation and saying, okay, if your family makes this kind of money and you've got this many siblings and you've got this kind of assets, here's basically what you probably will get or could potentially get if you go to Emory. And you're going to get a response just like this, where you've got a low estimate. Well, you might only get $5,000, or here's this really high estimate. There's a chance that you could receive $15,000 worth of aid, and then one in the middle. So looking at that, my suggestion is always to look at the best estimate, somewhere in the middle. Every person's situation is going to be different, and this kind of estimator really is just that. It's giving you a ballpark idea of potential aid that you might receive. That means that you cannot use these results to say, okay, if I get into Emory, here's exactly how much I'm going to get. Because remember that this is a tool that's online only, and you're inputting all the information. So you could put in whatever you wanted to really skew the results. But by putting in actual data, you get an idea of the kind of aid you might receive. Now, when you actually are applying to Emory for admissions and financial aid, the admission office actually decides whether you're admitted or not. And then the financial aid office actually decides exactly how much aid you're going to get. Something very similar to the net price calculator. This is just another term for an online estimate of aid that you could potentially receive, giving you a little bit more information. The net price calculator is a little bit longer, asks a few more questions, but gives you a little bit more of a pointed answer than just these estimates from my intuition. So the two are really good. It gives you a good start. It allows you to see that Emory could be possible for just about anybody. Anybody that wants to apply for aid, that's the only way to make sure that you're going to get the possibility of receiving that aid. If you don't apply for financial aid, we can't offer you any. If you do apply, then we at least have that chance of determining how much aid you and your family are going to receive. You then get to have all the control of deciding, I've been admitted at Emory, here's how much aid they're going to offer me. Is that going to make it possible for us to go?
John, thank you so much. So a couple of different things. One is I want to remind folks, for those of you that are international students, the net price calculator and the My Intuition is for need-based aid, right? And actually that is indicative of the domestic students as well. So it will not take into consideration in its estimates any type of merit aid that you might be receiving. And again, we'll talk a bit about merit aid in just a second. One of the students, John, asked a question about what happens with my, would my full need be met if I'm an independent student with a 0 EFC?
Well, certainly the independent student is a little bit different because their family looks a little bit different and their financial information is going to be a little bit different. We don't treat you any differently other than we're going to not ask for the same kind of information as we would of a dependent student, which makes up about 99.8% of the students that are going to apply for financial aid. Most students are coming from a home with either one parent or two parents, and those students are going to be dependent because of their age, because they're undergraduate students, and a list of other factors. Independent students, there's a little bit something different about them, whether it's their parents or their age or something else that makes them independent, where we don't ask for a lot of that same information. But you're reviewed in much the same way and you can get much the same kind of financial aid. So would we look at you and award 100% of your demonstrated need? Yes, we would. The same as we do dependent students. There's no difference there.
Okay, great. Another question that came through is, can you stack merit aid on top of demonstrated financial need?
The way in which outside awards or external scholarships or any of a number of different monikers you can give them works with your aid, at the end of the day, we can't allow any student to have more money either coming from the university or through their external scholarships than what the cost of attendance is. So at every turn, what we try to do is to stack that aid on top of aid you've already been receiving or you're receiving from Emory. In some cases, we may have to replace some of our aid with your external scholarships, again, depending on how much need you have and depending on the amount of those outside scholarships. So somebody that gets $1,000 from the local garden club may get that stacked on top. But somebody else who has 10 or 12 outside scholarships that equal $40,000 or $50,000, well, we may have to replace a lot of the aid that we offered because there's simply not enough room in a financial aid award or package for all of that outside aid plus all the aid that we've offered. So the answer is not just it depends, but it does depend on a lot of those factors. And so I can't answer it directly for each and every person because it's going to be a little bit different. But every time we can, we stack the award on top if there's enough room for it with the other aid that's already been offered.
Thank you so much. And then there was another question that came in from a student that's a U.S. resident, but they live in Jamaica. Boy, you must be having wonderful weather right now. Good for you. But the question is, would that make me an international student? And the answer is no. It does not make you an international student. If you are holding a U.S. passport, even if you've never actually lived in the U.S., you will be eligible for federal as well as need-based aid in the Needblind process. And then another question that came through, and it's a really, really good one. They're hesitating between early decision and regular decision. Is there a difference in terms of financial aid? How many of you are feeling that tension too in those questions? This is a great question because it kind of goes down to that philosophy of whether the institution is need aware or need blind, right? So again, we established that for the U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and documented students, we are need blind. So it doesn't matter whatsoever what decision plan you're considering, whether it's early decision or regular decision. From a financial aid perspective, we're going to meet 100% of your demonstrated need as long as you submit your FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and of course the CSS profile, right? So that's something to certainly take into consideration. Okay, good questions coming through. So next, we have, of course, a number of topics that we're going to address next, and that's going into the nitty-gritty of how these federal formulas, institutional formulas, and kind of those institutional discretions that John was talking about, how they really come together. So, John, I'm going to ask you to kind of walk us through these details in a little bit more granular level.
Sure. Okay. Well, certainly for the students that are eligible to apply for aid, U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens, it really starts with the free application for federal student aid. That's the FAFSA. That's the first one up here. And there's a link on our page on our how to apply to financial aid directly to FAFSA. You want to go to the one that's a .gov, definitely, because it is a governmental site. If you go to any .net or .org or .coms that have FAFSA in their name, you're probably going to end up in the wrong place. So use our links. That's really what they're there for. This is a form that a lot of people think is humongously long. It is made up of a number of questions, over 100 and so, but what it's getting down to is collecting data to help us determine how much money a family could contribute, because really, first and foremost, it's the family that bears the first responsibility up to the point that they can to provide for college. Once we reach that point, then that's where Emory steps in and takes care of the rest. That's where the expected family contribution, or EFC, comes into play. So the FAFSA is where you get started. It's free to complete. You don't have to pay anybody to do this. You do not have to pay to complete this form at all. It's not so in-depth where you need to get an accountant or somebody that really knows math to do this. A lot of this information is something that either you or your parents probably know already. It comes from tax returns for this coming fall. We're going to look at the 2019 federal income tax returns, the U.S. tax returns. Students that are living overseas that may not file a U.S. return, we do something a little bit different for them. But this is where it all starts. The second form that you'll see on this page, coming from the College Board, is a form called the CSS profile, financial aid profile. We also have links to this particular form on our site as well. This is a form that's a lot of the exact same questions as what the FAFSA asks for. And people say, well, gosh, if I already in a FAFSA, why do I need this other one? We need this other one to help us determine the institutional grant that's going to be awarded to you. So we use both of these forms, the FAFSA and the profile, to determine your need-based financial aid. The biggest difference between FAFSA and the profile is that the profile is not free. It does have a cost associated with it, depending on how many schools you want it to go to. The good news is you can't pay for a school to get it if that school doesn't want it. They won't even ask for it. The schools that do ask for it, there is a cost associated. There is a built-in fee waiver for the College Board's profile to where if your family is eligible, immediately your fee is waived up to 8 or 9 different schools. And so you can send this form out with still not paying for anything. If a family is in dire need, then reach out to somebody in the financial aid office, see if we can do something about waiving that fee for you. It's not for everybody, but it's for those families that are in great need. So then some colleges will ask for additional information, things like a specific application for financial aid or tax returns, W-2s. In Emory's case, we also then ask for a non-custodial parent profile. So if your biological parents, mom and dad, are no longer married, or maybe they were never married, that other parent, not the one that you live with, but that other parent will also have to complete the CSS profile for the non-custodial parent, because we feel that it's a responsibility of both parents to help fund the college education for their students. Some cases, it's not safe, or some other issue there is with the non-custodial parent. If you're not able to contact that other parent, let us know. There is a waiver form to ask us to not consider both parents. And if we approve that waiver, then we'll only ask about the parent that you live with. The tax returns and W-2s come to us through College Board through a document imaging service called IDOC. You'll get notified by the College Board once you submit the profile and what steps to take next. And you do reapply for financial aid every single year. It gets easier after the first year, though. The second, third, and fourth years, you only have to complete the FAFSA for Emory. All the other institutions could do things differently, but at Emory, the first year, we have you do FAFSA and profile, and then the next 3 years, just the FAFSA for us.
So John, one of the questions that came in prior to is the fact that, obviously you just said that it gets easier to apply for financial aid every single year because you get a little bit of practice with it. But things change. Things can change in a family, income dynamic, and of course the global pandemic has certainly impacted so many families. What happens if you're receiving XYZ aid at Emory, and all of a sudden the family situation changes, and you're going into your sophomore, your junior year? What happens then?
Sure. One of the main reasons why you have to reapply for financial aid every single year is because things are going to change. The cost of Emory is more than likely going to change every single year. A family's financial structure can change, where a parent could be out of work for a number of months or could lose a job and not be reemployed right away. Different jobs can be taken on where income could increase. It could be where you inherit money from a loved one that's passed. All of those factors, older siblings going to college or graduating from college. So we take all that into consideration, and we don't just say after 1 year's review, here's the age you're going to get for all 4 years. If we did that, we wouldn't be concerned with change. Because we are concerned, we have you apply every single year. In the middle of the year, if something changes, something drastic from when you first applied for financial aid, then yes, you reach out to our office, let us know what the situation is. We may ask for some updated financial information to then look and see, is there a way to do any kind of recalculation of the aid offer that's already been made? Can we do that? Yes, we can. Because Emory is private, we have additional monies that are endowed to us and budgeted to us every year to give away in need-based grant funds. And so we look to see, are there additional grant funds that could be offered? Is there additional loan that could be offered? Is there anything else that we can do to help a family whose information has changed greatly since they first applied for financial aid?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, there's such a culture of care for our student community on campus. And, you know, I've been at Emory for 9 years. John, how long have you been at Emory?
I'm going into 23.
Woo. All right. I'll tell you, one of the things that that keeps me at Emory is the fact that, particularly in the times that we're living in, it's been so incredibly heartfelt and heartwarming to see how much the institution just really tries to bend over backwards to help our students continue to be at Emory and continue to move forward in their studies and their pursuit of education. So it's something that you just really feel across the board. And with that, let's talk a little bit, John, of this formula that's on the screen right now. And as you're kind of walking us through, think through a couple of these questions too. One is, we haven't spoken about loans. So if you could talk a little bit about the loan function for students, that would be great. And then the other piece is, obviously, when you look at the cost of attendance and you're thinking about what is actually taken into account, can you address what is actually included in there? Is it living? Is it what other expenses to account for that?
Sure. So in this slide, the heading at the top, cost of education. It's also called cost of attendance at some places. Cost of attendance is when you're asking or trying to compare different colleges, you're wondering, in the end, what is it going to cost? All right, so a fair cost of attendance should include all the same kind of things. The amount of tuition for the year. And the year usually is considered a fall and a spring semester, or 3 quarters if you're looking at a college that's still on the quarter system. It's going to include mandatory student fees, an activity fee, a health fee, a mental health fee, something of that nature. It's going to include room and board. That means a place to sleep and meals to eat. So your meal plan is included there. Certainly the cost of books is included in what it costs to go to a college, the cost of getting to campus and then getting back home. That's a cost that we add in there. Certainly personal expenses, which can be very different for every single student. We're looking at an average to put into our cost of attendance, so that overall, when you see the cost of attendance at a college, that should be taken into account pretty much everything that you'll probably spend money on to go to college for a year. Now, it's usually called, its full name is estimated cost of attendance. Why? Because truly it has to be estimated. We know for sure what our tuition next year is going to be. We know for sure what our student fees are going to be. And we know what freshman housing is going to cost and what a freshman meal plan will cost. But everything else, books, the cost of travel, personal expenses, things like that, we're going to estimate to the best of our ability to say, here's what we think you'll probably spend. So it's basically a sticker price of Emory is what our cost of attendance is. So that's a starting point. And if you're looking at comparing colleges, that's where you should start. So then I skip down to the family contribution, the EFC, expected family contribution. That is a number that you'll find that comes from the calculation that we do, getting information from the FAFSA as well as the CSS profile. And the 2 different forms are going to bring back 2 different EFC numbers. What we're doing is we're looking at basically discretionary net income and assets of a family that could be used towards college, towards paying for college. Because again, that's where paying for college starts, there in the family. When we take that number and then add to it any kind of estimated financial assistance coming from Emory or from outside sources and subtract that from the cost of attendance, that's where we get what is left over, right? So the need, after looking at all these other factors, is really what we try to meet with our financial need, our financial aid coming from Emory. So your outside scholarships added to what your family can pay, subtracted from the cost, is where we start with how much financial aid are we going to award. Just one more time, quick, simple, cost of attendance minus any external scholarships, minus what your family can pay, is what your financial need is. Financial need is not, I need financial aid to go to college. Financial need is what's left over after taking into consideration these other factors. So how we meet your need is through a number of sources. Could be from merit aid that's determined by the Office of Admission. It could also be determined and met by grant aid, free money granted to a student coming from Emory College. Federal work study, money that you can earn as a student by working a job here on campus, and also by parent or student loans. Student loans, loan being the four-letter word in the conversation, is money that you can borrow as a student and pay back once you graduate. A lot of people are scared to death about student loans, and you shouldn't be, in the fact that they are money that helps make the goal of a college degree possible. I would always recommend, if you can do anything other than take out loans, then do that. However, a student loan or a loan a parent can take out for college, in my opinion, is money well spent if you use it wisely. If you could borrow $5,000, but you only need $1,000, you should only borrow $1,000. The student loan debt conversation that you hear about in political ads and around this time of year are meant to be very scary. When you hear of students that are $150,000, $200,000 in debt of student loans, that is not for an undergraduate student who gets a degree, a four-year degree, and moves on. That huge loan debt typically is for a student who's gone on to graduate school or maybe professional education, business degree, medical degree, that kind of thing, where they've been in college for 6, 7, 8 years, because graduate students have to borrow most of what it costs to go to college if they don't have it. So that $150,000, $200,000 student loan debt is not for undergraduate students. Their average debt load, anywhere from $38,000 to $40,000. Now, that's still a lot of money, but it's certainly nowhere close to the fear-inducing $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt. So loans are good when used properly and in conjunction with other types of financial aid.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I had never actually heard it put in that regard. It also makes me think, part of this college search experience too, as you're taking into account where you're going to be applying, I would also be looking at what is the Career Center offering student? What is the placement after graduation? And all of those pieces. And actually in each of our admission Q&A sessions that we host on a weekly basis, starting back up in late January, we actually talk a good bit about that. But you could also visit the Career Center website and learn a little bit more about that. And Beth, if you have the opportunity, if you could actually add the Career Center link to the chat for folks, that would be great too. John, two questions. Now that we're actually talking about, I like the way you called that, the four-letter word. Two things. One is, can you talk a little bit about the Emory Advantage and what is the Emory Advantage?
Certainly. Emory Advantage is a program that Emory developed a number of years ago to try to find a way to help the neediest of students afford Emory. Neediest meaning high financial need. So families that have a total family income and family financial structure where their total family financial ability to pay is less than 50,000, they could potentially then have their student loan replaced with an additional grant. So in a case where a student is eligible for the Emory Advantage program financially, they would get additional grants in place of student loans. They could still borrow if they wanted to, but this is our way of trying to keep that student from even borrowing to start with. There's a second part of the Emory Advantage, which looks at a total family income that's over $100,000. That then says if you borrow up to a certain point, once you get to a point in your borrowing, we'll start to put on additional grants in place of those loans. That typically doesn't really kick in until a student's possible junior year, but most likely senior year, because a student has to borrow up to $15,000 of need-based student loans. That's the subsidized student loan. And it simply takes that long to amass that amount of debt. But Emory Advantage is a program where we're seeking out those students, and we do this automatically. You don't have to ask for it. As we're determining financial aid, if a student is eligible for additional grants in place of loans through Emory Advantage, we make that happen right away.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so let's talk about the different types of funding that's out there. We've talked a little bit about merit. John, can you, a couple of different things. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between merit and need? And then there was a great question that came through. One is, if you don't have a social security number, how do you fill out the FAFSA? Can you fill out the FAFSA? Do you have a social security number?
You can complete the FAFSA without a social security number, but we won't be able to then pull it into Emory, because that's one of the ways that we confirm that you are who you say you are. So international students specifically that don't have a social, there's really no need for them to complete FAFSA, because we'll never see them, also because they're just not eligible. With FAFSA, with Emory, the Department of Education that runs FAFSA, and at Emory, our resources are put first and foremost to all kinds of security. So I'm not worried about either FAFSA being hacked in and information being stolen. I say that, and tomorrow something's going to happen. That particular number in and of itself, we use sparingly, mainly to confirm the identity of the person that's applying for financial aid. So putting a social security number on a FAFSA, once it gets to Emory, it's virtually in a safe, and nobody else is going to get to it. The difference here between merit aid and need-based aid, good question. Merit typically means that you have a talent or some kind of other activity about yourself that makes you eligible for scholarship given to you, not based on how much you can or can't pay, but it's based on who you are. At Emory, we're a Division III college, and so we don't have scholarships to offer to athletes based on your athletic talents, but talents such as music or debate or others certainly could garner you merit-based scholarships offered by the admissions office. The financial aid office doesn't get involved in determining merit aid simply because we're just looking at finances. With merit aid, and Giselle could tell you that they're looking at everything about a student, everything from grades and test scores, yes, but more personal attributes. What kind of talents do you have? And those kind of things. What kind of student are you? Need-based aid are things like grants, money that's given to a family based on how much money they have or don't have. Federal Pell Grant, federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, SCOG, and others. The Emory University Grant is money that's granted, given to families based on their need. Student loans, the Stafford loans, which are both subsidized and unsubsidized, which talks about when interest is going to start accruing on those loans are offered. Those are need-based. Federal work study for those families that do demonstrate need. The student could be offered work study funds that they can earn as they're going through. And then there are scholarships that are offered based on what a family could contribute to the education. That's why they're different from a merit-based scholarship. They get the name need-based scholarships. So merit and need-based aid, two very different things. One based on personal attributes and talents, the other based on finances and what a family could or could not afford to pay for college.
Right. All right, covered a lot of ground here. A lot of these terms we have checked off the list in terms of understanding a little bit more of what's behind the definitions for each of these. There have been some amazing questions about the Emory University Scholars Program in the chat. So let's get to that, because I know that you are eager to learn a little bit more about that. And John said it best. When we think about merit scholarship at Emory, our big signature scholarship is really the Woodruff Scholarship. And that is part of Oxford College as well as Emory College. The only thing that students need to do in order to be considered for the Emory University Scholarship Programs, which includes the Woodruff. It also includes the Goizueta Scholars, which is part of the business school, and we'll talk about Goizueta in just a second. But first, you got to practice saying Goizueta if you're interested in business. So a couple different things. One is the only thing you need to do is apply. Just submit your application by the November 15th deadline for scholars. And that's, so for students that are interested in doing regular decision and early decision 2, which the traditional deadline is January 1st, in order to be considered for the Emory University Scholars Program and our biggest merit, you just have to submit that very same application by November 15th. There's one extra question that you have to fill out. The question is, would you like to be considered for the Emory University Scholars Program? Yes? No. That's it. The hard work you've actually been doing for the last 4 years, right? For students that are applying early decision 1, that deadline is of course November 1, you do have to submit, again, same application, answer the same easy question, but submit your application by that November 1 earlier deadline. What we look for, in particular to the Woodruff Scholars for both Emory College and Oxford College, this is, when we say that we read holistically, I mean, Beth and I read constantly, and we receive roughly about 28,000 plus applications a year. Typically for the Scholars Program, we receive just shy of about 12,000 applications. And we actually take the time to not just look at your grades, not just look at your rigor. That is essential, your rigor. What have you been able to have access to in your school community, and what have you taken advantage of? But the big question is actually the why. And then for your essays, we're looking for what drives you, what motivates you, how do you think about what is around you in the everyday, and how in the micro as well as your micro engagement, what are you doing to propel whatever it is? And we seriously mean whatever it is that you're passionate for and about, to push that foot and to really improve the human condition, whether it's in the sciences, the arts, debate, music, arts, social sciences, or business, you name it. It's what matters to you. It's not this perfect formula of, if you do X, Y, Z, you will get a Woodruff Scholarship. Sometimes I wish it was that easy, but no, every word that you write matters to us. The intentionality behind it matters to us. And then, of course, it's the other folks that are part of putting together your story. And that's your school counselor, which will look at a letter of recommendation from them, as well as 2 teachers that really take the time to tell us how you engage inside the classroom, outside the classroom, and how you are as a human, because that matters to us in this endeavor. Okay, so that's the Woodruff's scholarship. The neat thing about that, 2 things. One is if you start at the Oxford College campus, you can continue on as a Woodruff Oxford Scholar at the Atlanta campus for your junior and your senior year. So it's part of a wonderful relationship. You also get some great perks. You get first dibs on registering for classes, and you get first dibs on housing too, as well as a whole slew of other opportunities that you get to really engage in. For those of you that are interested in business, this is a scholarship again, and these are what we're talking between the Woodruff and the Goizueta scholars. These are full ride scholarships that cover the full cost of your education for both domestic students as well as international students. That is something that I do want to be very clear on when we're talking about merit scholarships, particularly the Woodruff and the Goizueta. Your nationality has no bearing whatsoever in those decisions. We are looking for talent. We are looking for the best, most kind of curious talent, regardless of where you're from and where you're coming from. So keep that in mind. For Goizueta, obviously those academics, that rigorous curriculum, and then again, social entrepreneurship, for example, is very big in the business school. How are you thinking critically about the topics that you want to progress and move forward, whether it's in finance or real estate or you're starting your own 50c3, which so many of our students have done, or you're shifting culture dynamics in your high school, your local community, and you've engaged special speakers to really kind of, again, move those topics forward. That's what we're going to be looking for. One thing to note with the Goizueta Scholar finalist is that you're automatically admitted into the business school if you come in as a Goizueta Scholar, and as well as the perks that I just mentioned for the Woodruffs. You additionally also have just direct access to the dean and the associate dean of the business school. And kind of like the Woodruffs, you kind of have carte blanche on what you take advantage of on campus, which is super exciting for so many of our students. So what about external scholarships and resources, John? We've had a couple of students ask particularly about Hope in Georgia, Zell Miller Awards, and of course Questbridge Match, which we just matched with over 50 students. They were our first admitted students into the class of 2025. So if you could chat a little bit about these external scholarships.
Sure. Locally here, for students that are living in the state of Georgia and coming to Emory, you will have consideration for either Hope Scholarship or Zell Miller Scholarship. We would assume that for every Georgia resident that is admitted to Emory, you're at least Hope Scholarship eligible. Now, for us, that means that you're going to get a certain amount of money paid towards your tuition. Yearly, that's going to be about $4,300 this year. If you're then determined to be a Zell Miller Scholar after you graduate high school and get those last-minute grades sent in, if you're determined to be a Zell Miller Scholar, then that amount is going to be about $5,600 going forward. That is just for Georgia residents. For everybody that's applying who's gone through taking the standardized testing, National Merit Scholarships are offered, both sponsored by Emory and sponsored by other corporations. National Merit sponsors one as well. Those awards are determined outside of Emory. They're determined through the National Merit Scholarship Association Corporation. You would get started with National Merit as you're going through and taking the SATs. The PSAT is where you get started. but National Merit is money that certainly can be used at Emory to help you pay for the cost of attendance. QuestBridge, as Giselle mentioned, has already been decided for this year. You use it and are rewarded as an incoming freshman. So higher level college students are not admitted into QuestBridge after their first year. There are a couple of other notes here for external resources for scholarships. FastWeb is a very reasonable one that you can put in some very basic information about yourself. It's basically an online search tool. There's no bad place to look for a scholarship unless you're asking for a scholarship from a foundation that says, here's an application form, complete it and send us $50. If that's what you're hearing, then run the other way as fast as you can. You should not have to pay to apply for an outside scholarship. Companies that parents might work for or other organizations that you might be involved in may have a national arm that also offers some kind of scholarship for college. If you don't ask, you won't find out. So it's certainly time to get out there and ask and really hunt for outside scholarships outside of Emory, just about anywhere you can.
Sounds good. So one question that came through that I think is actually a really good one to clarify too is, obviously we've been talking about Emory College as well as Oxford College. Is the cost of attendance different at the two institutions, the two colleges?
They're not. Yeah, the Oxford College and the Emory College have the exact same cost. Really the difference is in where they're located and their size, and Giselle can certainly go into detail there. The cost at most institutions are exactly the same. So that shouldn't be a factor. You can compare apples and apples, and Emory College and Oxford College are different in what their makeup is, but the cost is exactly the same. We're a private college, so our tuition is the same for those coming to us from Georgia or from outside the state. And certainly international students do not pay anything extra than what domestic students pay.
Thank you. And another question that came through is, are merit scholarships Needblind? And the answer to that is yes. At Emory, merit scholarships are Needblind, which means we do not take your ability to pay into account when we are making final decisions on the Woodrow Scholar finalist as well as the Goizueta Scholar finalists. So that is something to note. All right, so we are wrapping. So next steps, John, if you could walk us through sort of that checklist of, all right, these are the things, if you're a senior this year in particular, and there's a lot of seniors that are on this call with their families as well, what are the key things that they really need to have on hand and be ready for?
Certainly, if you hadn't started to apply to colleges, now is definitely the time to do that. You want to determine is a college Needblind or NeedAware. That may have a factor in whether you want to apply to that college or go to that college. If they're going to accept you and not accept you based on what you can pay, again, that may change your opinion of them. Verify your Social Security number as a U.S. resident. Make sure that the Social Security Administration has the right number and the right name associated with that, because it is so important for us to then connect to your financial data using that number. Talk over with your family, with your parents, what kind of money is available for you to go to college. If you've got siblings, obviously not all the money that's out there is going to go just to your education. It may have to go to siblings that are coming up. Have that discussion and be honest with one another. That's the best thing you could do. Going into college applications, not knowing what your parents are or are not going to be able to pay for college, that's the scary thing. If you go into it knowing exactly what has to happen in order to make a college possible, definitely better than not knowing. The net price calculators, again, help you understand what potential financial aid may be offered by various colleges. And then when you get ready to sit down and do FAFSA profile, pull everything together. You're going to need 2019 tax returns. You may need to know what kind of other assets, what other kind of investments or checking or savings account balances you have. And certainly then anytime you're completing these applications, you want to make sure that you have all the zeros in the right place and the decimal points in the right place. If you get to a stopping point and you don't know how to answer a question, give a call to that college. If you call me and ask me what you should put on a FAFSA, I can help you with specific questions. Can't stay on the phone and help you through the whole application, but reach out to somebody in financial aid if you've got a question. At Emory, the time to apply for financial aid is the exact same time you're applying for admission. Because we're Needblind for so much, you want to apply for aid at the same time so that as you get your admissions decision, you can also get your financial aid offer decision so that you can see both of them in front of you and make some final decisions for you and your family.
Great. All right. Well, that takes us to the deadlines. These are, of course, posted on our apply.emory.edu website, but it's always so good. I'm one of the people that puts all the deadlines on a calendar, whether it's your Google calendar or your Outlook calendar, whatever thing keeps you on track, and whichever decision plan you ultimately choose to apply to, I kind of put the full docket on there. It's even better, quite frankly, when you have either your family member or guardian, or if you're working with a community-based organization that's really helping you throughout the process, giving them these deadlines too for the different institutions that you're applying to, so that everybody is working on task and on target to meet the deadlines. Because a couple of things, you want to make sure that if you are applying for need-based aid in particular, you want to make sure that you're doing that by the deadline, so that when you get your admissions decision, if it's a positive decision and you're excited about it, then guess what? Your financial aid package is going to come typically 24 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours after a decision. Yeah. So if everything is,
yeah, definitely so.
Which is great. Good. So, but that's if you have all those documents submitted by the deadlines, right? If you don't, then you're going to be waiting to make that decision until all those documents are submitted and you have all of that in front of you. So just keep that in mind as you're going along and doing your applications. And again, there was another question that came through in terms of whether or not to apply for early decision if perhaps you're a low-income student. And the answer to that is, if you're a low-income student and family, and Emory University, whether it's Oxford College or Emory College, is your first choice, by all means, apply, submit your financial aid documentations by either the early decision 1 or early decision 2 at this juncture deadline, because we're going to meet 100% of your demonstrated need. And so it doesn't matter what decision plan you're applying to. That's our commitment to bringing in the very best talent from across the country and around the world as well. So lots of good stuff to certainly take in. I know that it's been a lot of information that we've been throwing at you for the last hour. Thanks for hanging out with us, and hopefully you learned some good stuff about Emory, Oxford, and the university, and certainly through the Emory University Scholars Program. January 1 is our next big deadline, and then you can see here January 13th for ED2 financial aid pieces, and February 3rd for regular decision. So we wish you all the very, very best. If you have any questions whatsoever, if it's a financial aid, need-based related, Beth will put on here the contact information for the Office of Financial Aid. If it is merit-based or international aid related, or of course admission related, she's going to put the admission site on here too, which includes all of our admission counselor contact information as well. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. And be well, be safe, stay healthy wherever you are. Have a wonderful holiday season. We wish you all the best.